Thank you. Our next speaker is Russet Lederman, and Russet is a writer, editor, and co-founder of 10 by 10 Photobooks, and her talk is The Photobook as Object.
Hi, I'm Russet Lederman. Thank you, Ken, Tony, Jared, Sophia, and Mindy for inviting me. I come to this discussion as both a researcher and photobook collector who places a special value on the collaborative design and physicality of photobooks published in Japan. In my presentation, I will be discussing the objectness of photobooks created by both established and younger Japanese photographers. Over the years, my husband and I have spent a great deal of time tracking down Japanese photobooks, either online, through auctions, or in bookshops in Tokyo's Jimbocho district. And like many collectors who have photo book acquisition disorder, I start with the object and work backwards, researching the history that informs a new acquisition, asking questions to help me understand its unique objectness. How was it conceived? Who else was involved in its conception or production? And how it functions as both an object and a book. Many of the Japanese photo books I will be showing you today are not only a collection of photographs, but rather expertly conceived tiny universes that are carefully executed with design, image sequencing, and text to image relationships in perfect balance or imbalance. They are collaborative endeavors that highlight an amicable collision of a photographer, designer, editor, and writer. So the first bookmaker I'll be discussing is Tadanori Yoko, a designer who collaborated with many 1960s and 70s Japanese photographers. However, to call Yoko simply a designer is to miss the full breadth of his expansive career. Yoko is an artist who straddles many fields: design, photography, advertising, painting, music, and writing. The visual richness of his work draws upon numerous and varied cultural, social, and political topics, including traditional woodblock prints, American pop art, surrealism, Russian constructivism, and the social and political tensions that marks post-war Japan's contentious relationship with U.S. military presence on its soil. There we go. The book we are looking at is The Complete Tadanori Yoko from 1971, and it is a compendium of his work. This is a good place to start because included in the design of this book are many of the objectness attributes I will be discussing with other books in my talk. I want to point out from the previous slide the elaborately illustrated slipcase and obi, or belly band, both typical design elements of Japanese photo books. Inside is a riotous flow of images that document his work while simultaneously creating new experimental narratives related to the book's materiality. The Complete Tadanori Yoko gives a glimpse of a heightened physicality that transforms a classic compilation of reproductions into an original object. Yoko, as well as the designer Kohei Segura, took this approach in several design collaborations with the photographer Eiko Hosoe. One of the most interesting aspects of Hosoe and Yoko's collaborations, along with many other Japanese photographers and designers, is the reinterpretations found in successive reprinting of photographers' well-known publications. In particular, Hosoe's Barakai, first printed in 1963 as Killed by Roses, later reprinted in 1971, and 1985 as Ordeal by Roses, and most recently released in 2008 as a facsimile of the 1963 original, is a great example of the dramatic differences in each new photo book collaboration. Barakai, Ordeal by Roses, published in 1985 by Aperture Foundation, is a third reprint. At first, this book appears to be a straightforward sequence of images. However, within its pages is evidence of the rich collaborative history between Hosoe as photographer, Yoko as designer, and Yukio Mishima as both the writer and book subject. The 1963 original book, which was designed by Segura, presents an oversized volume filled with rich gravure images housed in an elaborate slipcase. As an admirer of Hosoi's photographs, the writer Mishima invited Hosoi to his home to supposedly take publicity photographs. However, the resulting images are far from tame PR photos. Rather, they present a Baroque surrealism with shots of Mishima wrapped in a garden hose or bound in a rope or costumed to look like a member of the village people. The book's design by Segura heightens both Hosoi and Mishima's theatrical intent. 8 years later, Hosoi revisited Barakei, but this time with the help of Yoko. This reinterpretation, renamed Ordeal by Roses, is completely different from the 1963 original by Segura. As an oversized black velvet-covered book that comes in a complex fold-out case, this version of Barakei has a reworked text by Mishima and a dramatic re-edit of Hosoi's images into 5 sections in concert with montages by Yoko. The entire book was conceived and released as a memorial to Mishima, who committed ritual suicide in 1970 as a protest to a re-signing of a controversial post-war U.S.-Japan security treaty. So another 1960s example of Japanese photo book experimentation in which design meets photography meets text can be seen in Kikuji Kawada's Chizu, The Map, from 1965, with a reprint from 2005 and a facsimile from 2014. Designed by Segura, Chizu is simultaneously a documentary and multi-tiered conceptual object that takes the subject of the Hiroshima bombing and Japan's complex relationship with the United States beyond a simple recounting of events. Packaged in a cardboard slipcase and interior fold-out black wrapper, inscribed with phrases related to the bombing, Segura's design of the 1965 original and 2014 facsimile perfectly marry the elements of the printed page with the Japanese tradition of package design. The cover image on the jacket shows a close-up of a flame with a typographic overlay of a poem. The words Enola Gay are visible. Within are gritty high-contrast gravures on gatefolded full-bleed pages, which require the viewer to peel away layers in a slow process of discovery that reveals fragmentary views of the Hiroshima blast and American post-war occupation juxtaposed with abstract close-ups. The overall visual sensation is visceral, merging the archival, scientific, and emotional into an intricate portrayal of a historical event. Then Chizu, which was reprinted again in 2005 and published by Nezreli and Getsuyo in 2 separate English and Japanese editions, uses the same gatefold structure as the original, but substitutes the elaborate slipcase and wrappers for more straightforward packaging. So now moving on to Daido Moriyama. In 1974, 3 years after his return from New York, Japanese photographer Daido Moriyama realized a highly original and performative method to publish and distribute his New York images. With limited gallery venues in Tokyo, Moriyama rented a storefront and a Xerox machine for 14 days and created an analog version of what we now call on-demand printing. The book, produced by photocopying his New York images, collating them in different daily sequences, and then stapling them with a silkscreen cover, is entitled Another Country in New York. In 2013, this now rare book was released as a facsimile edition. So then in November 2011, as part of the Performa Art Series in New York, Japanese photo book scholar Ivan Vartanian organized at the Aperture Gallery a recreation of Moriyama's 2014 storefront show. Set up like a printing studio, visitors could purchase tickets to create a personalized selection of 20 of Moriyama's Tokyo street scene photographs encased in silkscreen covers. With the layout composed of half-fold pages, the process presented many challenges and unknowns, with the end result blissfully full of surprises. Scrappy and handmade, both the facsimile of Another Country in New York and the 2012 TKY edition have a DIY and zine-like quality that foreshadows much of the materiality present in photo books by a younger generation of Japanese bookmakers. So despite a smartphone-centric digital culture, many contemporary Japanese photographers still value the objectness and physical aspects of the book and continue to see it as one of the primary vehicles for presenting their work. Towards that end, their books address a new materiality that forgoes conventional photographic processes in favor of experimentation that questions the very nature of bookmaking and photography. In particular, a group of photo book makers I've nicknamed the New Materialists employ methods that tear, cut, smudge images in mostly self-published books that play with unusual bindings and formats. Most prolific among this group is Daisuke Yokata, a young photographer whose irreverent approach to materials is often tied to both public and private performances. Starting with film, Yokata quickly transcends traditional photography in a practice that brazenly abuses both analog and digital processes. His first book, Backyard, which presents degraded and gritty images of a road trip, purposely avoids a singular conceptual or technical allegiance. The zine-like quality in the self-published book signals further experiments by Yokata, as seen in Transparanto, printed entirely on layered transparent film sheets that are interspersed with blank white pages. The book is a visual artifact of Yokata's unorthodox creative processes. Turning the spiral-bound translucent pages of Transparanto places the viewer in the same creative space as the artist, where nothing is stable and each new page distorts the previous one. Mayumi Hasakura, another member of the New Materialists, is a storyteller whose images trade on provocative reimagined realities that merge the artifice of the darkroom with a sexualized gaze. However, in her artist book, the viewer is hard-pressed to clearly discern the narratives. Composed from studio and darkroom scraps and outtakes, each copy of this book is unique. Differing sizes of glossy photographic paper and matte laser paper are bound together in a seemingly haphazard way. Odd shapes and tactility of the pages, along with the book's irregular text block, emphasize a sculptural quality that undermines traditional ideas of a photo book. Distinctive to the books of many New Materialists is a complete disregard for traditional photography and the central tenets of bookmaking. Although photography is their predominant tool, it is not necessarily what they make. Hiroshi Takazawa, another young photographer who falls into the New Materialist group, takes material as his main focus in books that combine images of stones, rocks, cement, and concrete fragments on varying sizes of paper sheets. In 2015, in his 2015 book Mass, Takazawa interweaves a mashup of paper types and sizes into a text block that loosely sits unbound in its covers, acting more like a portfolio than a book. Similar to Hasakura, Takazawa focuses on the viewer's sense of touch to reinforce his book's objectness, weight, and rough textures. Another distinctive group of young Japanese photo book makers has emerged in recent years from workshops organized by Reminders Photography Stronghold, a gallery and photo book community co-founded by Yumi Goto. Identified by their handmade quality, personal narratives mixed with social and political awareness, the books created in Goto's workshops regularly receive acclaim in international festivals. The first book from a Reminder Photography Stronghold workshop to capture attention was Yoshikatsu Fuji's Red String. Created as a dummy in 2014 in a 3-day workshop run by Goto and Belgian photographer Jan Roestiel, Red String sets the stage for many of the object-like characteristics that are the hallmark of a Goto-influenced book. Composed from family snapshots laid out on lined notebook paper, sequenced into 2 opposing text blocks, which are bound by red thread to a white felt cover adorned with a partially cropped wedding photograph, the book recounts the unraveling of Fuji's parents' marriage. As Fuji relates, in Japan, legend has it that a man and a woman predestined to be together have their little fingers tied together by an invisible red string since the time they were born. Unfortunately, the red string tying my parents together either came untied or broke. Another participant in Goto's workshop is Kazuma Obara, an Osaka photographer who created a self-published book in 2015 entitled 30, which was later reissued under the title of Exposure. 30 years after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in the former Soviet Union, Obara, a photojournalist, traveled to the Ukraine to photograph individuals whose lives had been altered by the Chernobyl explosion and the political strife surrounding it. Composed of 2 books and a newspaper sheet in a wooden box, Obara uses in the first book his own photographs to document the never-ending commute of the workers tasked with the decontamination of the plant, while in the second book he uses desaturated found negatives to tell a story of an invisible girl suffering from ongoing radiation sickness. Accompanying these 2 books is a replica of a newspaper page from the time of the disaster. 30 is a slow book. The viewer must take their time to open the book, unpackage the books, and unfold the newspaper. Once again, touch is a central tool in shaping the objectness of the book. And another encouraging development among this new generation of photo book makers is the strong presence of women creating object-like books. An example is The Restoration Will by Mayumi Suzuki, a handmade book created in a Reminder Photography Stronghold workshop and later released by Seba Editions. Suzuki, who was born and raised in a fishing village in the Tohoku region, lost both her parents in the devastating earthquake and tsunami that struck Japan on March 11, 2011. Through tipped-in family photos, inserted booklets, and gatefolded pages, The Restoration Will recounts Suzuki's return in the aftermath of the disaster to collect the remnants of her parents' belongings, including her father's cameras, lenses, studio portraits, and snapshots. The final book I will be showing you also deals with Japan's 2011 disaster, but with a focus on the Fukushima nuclear meltdown that resulted after the tsunami. And Where Did the Peacocks Go? By Kyoto-based Miho Kajioka is about a group of peacocks that were left within the Fukushima evacuation zone. As a book that has gone through 3 different designs and 3 successive reprints, it feels like an artifact that could have been found in the wreckage of a deserted village. Printed in black on aged yellow paper with text, printed on the inside of Japanese folded pages. The various iterations include pockets for a booklet of prose, an exposed binding, and a custom cardboard box. Small in scale, this book gives the impression of a keepsake that was long forgotten and recently unearthed. So, in spite of all the in all the Japanese photo books that I've just shown you today, there is a powerful collaborative spirit working towards the goal of an object that engages all the viewer's senses. The blurring of boundaries between book, sculpture, document, artifact, photography, and art object is a primary focus, as designers, writers, photographers, and editors work together to upend traditional ideas of mainstream photo book publishing. From my perspective, this is the past, present, and future of photo book making in Japan. Thank you.
The last speaker of the morning session is Paul Chan, artist and publisher, Badlands Unlimited in New York City, and his talk is, What is Badlands Unlimited?
I also want to thank Ken and Mindy and Tony, who I've known for a long, long time, for inviting me here. I've learned a lot already. I might have to steal that sandpaper cover idea. This image, for me, crystallizes two important qualities about Badlands Unlimited, the press I founded in 2010. Where we come from and where we're always looking to go. Where we come from are ebooks. We began as an ebook publisher, exclusively run by artists. We still publish ebooks. There are many reasons why we publish ebooks. I'll get into it later on. One of them is that it's cheap, and I didn't have money to publish paper books. We made this poster in 2016 to celebrate the premiere of a series of artist ebooks that we published that summer. You might recognize some of the names. Rachel Rose is a great young video artist who's currently right now in the Carnegie International in Pittsburgh. She also showed at the Whitney Museum. We've got Howie Chen, a great artist here in New York who runs his own independent space called Chen's in Brooklyn. Magnus Schaefer, towards the middle there, because he's very shy, is a curator who was on the curatorial team of the Bruce Nauman retrospective at MoMA and MoMA PS1. Bernard Wilhelm is a path-breaking fashion designer from LA. Friends, colleagues, people we admire that we published experimental ebooks with in the summer of 2016. We made this poster to celebrate them, and what I like about it also is that it encapsulates the second quality that I think is important to Badlands, which is that we're always looking to look outward. We are, I would like to think, always looking outward. In this picture, the outward quality is literal. These posters were posted all over New York, in Brooklyn, Manhattan, the Bronx, mostly in neighborhoods where English is not the dominant language. That's why we made it in Spanish. It also mimics the look and feel of band posters that you see around Brooklyn, in my neighborhood, where in the neighborhoods where artists live, more or less. These posters, I don't know, I'm not a researcher. These are the first street poster campaign for an artist ebook series, which is a not unremarkable distinction, I think. We also wanted these publications to, I think one of the reasons why we publish is because we're always looking to look outward beyond the sanctuaries in which we belong. We know, of course, that communities are important because they offer us sanctuary, a place to belong, and at times protection from what William James once called the great onrush of mankind. But we also can admit that sometimes sanctuaries protect us by isolating us from that great onrush. This isolationism impacts us in a number of ways. It makes us look inward rather than outward. It cultivates a taste for premium treatment for the community we happen to belong to, above all others, perhaps to the detriment of all others. Badlands is always looking outward, I'd like to think, inform content and methods of distribution. We're always looking to go beyond the fields and sanctuaries that we happen to belong to. Some things by the numbers were established in 2010. Sorry, I gotta get my glasses. We publish trade paper books, ebooks, and artist works in digital and print forms. And what I mean by trade paper books is that our ambition is to make books for general readership, not simply for people in contemporary art, where I belong, but for a general readership. This is why our books tend to look and feel like trade paperbacks, what you find in bookstores. They're cheap. They are printed. I wouldn't say cheap. That's a terrible word for it. They're wonderful books that you can buy very cheaply. They're edited, published, and created for a general readership who might have interest in contemporary art. And on the other side, we try to bring contemporary artists, writers, curators to write and produce works for a general public, not just a public already privy to contemporary art. We have published 57 books since 2010. We have premiered over 40 artists' works and editions. Our paper books are distributed through DAP in the Americas and Koenig Books in Europe. Our ebooks are still distributed through Apple, iBooks, and Amazon. And our works and editions are available on our website and at independent bookshops like The Great Printed Matter and Ooga Booga in LA, and other places. I'm just going to go through some of the books that we have published to give you a sense of what we publish. I'm going to start with this one, Into Words, The Selected Writings of Carol Dunham, which we published last year. For those of you who may or may not know, Carol Dunham, or Tip, as friends call him, to me is arguably one of the best living painters in America, if not the world. Upper left is a picture of one of his paintings at the Gladstone Gallery show this summer, which I thought was incredible. No one paints like Tip. Also, no one writes like Tip. Tip has been writing for 2 decades in art form and for artist monographs. And for some unknown, inexplicable reason, no one has asked him to collect his writings. It's shocking to me. So in 2015, I talked to Tip. I said, Tip, look, do you want to publish your collected writings? And he's like, sure. And so 2 years later, we published Into Words. As an artist, as a working artist showing, I don't covet reviews of my own work. I'm frankly indifferent to them. But as a publisher, I truly covet book reviews of Badlands books. I love reviews. I love blurbs. Everyone now knows not to email me, because if you do, I might steal your words and edit it into a blurb. So, and the reason why this is my first book is because this book was just recently reviewed in the New York Review of Books by Sanford Schwartz in the November 8th edition, just coming out tomorrow officially. I was very proud of it. Tip's very proud of it. Outward looking. We're looking at contemporary artists, contemporary writers into a general reading public. That's the ambition. Other blurbs I love, Amy Silman, a wonderful painter in her own right, writing a review of the book in a book forum, and Andrea K. Scott wrote about it in the New Yorker last year. This book we published this year, 2018, White Walling, Art, Race, and Protest in 3X by Aruna D'Souza. Aruna is a wonderful art critic who writes mostly for 4 Columns, a great online magazine. She's written for the Wall Street Journal, Book Forum, other places. This is the only book by a trade publisher. No other trade publisher, independent publisher, academic publisher has published a book about art, race, and protest in America. Specifically, the thing that I think everyone talked about last year, which is the 2017 Whitney Biennial, and the painting by Dana Schutz, and the conversations around art and race and protests that ensued. No one has yet to publish one. We're the only publisher that has done it. It's a wonderful book. It behooves me to say that this book is in 3 chapters. The 3rd chapter is about the Met in 1969, when there was an exhibition here called Harlem on My Mind, where not one black painter or sculptor was invited into the show. Aruna D'Souza is a storyteller, and she tells the story of how we're all entangled in conversations and issues about art, race, and protests, even at art institutions. And it's wonderful. And we got our first New York Times book review this summer, which is on top right there. Other blurbs. I love blurbs. Don't email me, because I will blurb you. Another book, Craig Owens, Portrait of a Young Critic. For those of you who may or may not know, Craig Owens was a fantastic theorist and writer who died too young at the age of 40 in 1990 with AIDS-related illness. He was one of the founding editors of October Journal and went on to be an editor at Art in America in the 80s. This is a never-before-published set of interviews with Craig and Lynn and Kate. And the reason why I published this year is because young artists had questions about art, money, power, politics, market. And Greg was dealing with those same questions in the 80s. And he did it, and he talked about it in a very authentic way, in a conflicted way, in a way that resonated with the people who worked for me, who were younger artists. And so we published it. We're always publishing for readers and perhaps for a new generation of artists and writers. More blurbs. Love blurbs. Does anyone want to get... No, no one else that. A few more books on our backlist. On the left is a perennial bestseller for us, Marcel Duchamp, The Afternoon Interviews by Calvin Tompkins. I'm sure you know Tad. Calvin Tompkins, the New Yorker staff writer who's been profiling artists since 1962. He wrote the definitive book on Marcel Duchamp, published by Henry Holt in 1993. It's an 800-page book. I don't know anyone who has time to read an 800-page book, as great of a book as that is. So we condensed his book into a 100-page book with just the interviews. And I love it because a new generation has found Duchamp again as a witty, interesting humanist, a moralist, actually. Yvonne Rainer, 2011, it's her first collection of poetry, her first and only collection of poetry. Yvonne's a friend of mine. She's a prolific writer. I emailed her one day in 2010. I said, I started a press. Do you have anything to publish? Assuming that it would be no. A couple weeks later, she emails me a Microsoft Word document full of poems that she had never published. Yvonne right now is actually in the Judson Church Theater show at MoMA right now. She just performed. She's a national treasure, and I feel privileged to have published her. Another book, 2015, we do also translations. And so we translated one of Plato's early dialogues called Hippias Minor. So we newly translated by Sarah Rudin, who's a wonderful Harvard classicist, who's also translated Homer and certain other Greco-Roman texts. We worked with her and published a new translation, and we were lucky enough to have gotten reviews from classical reviews, blurbs reviews, lifeblood of publishing. Publishing is a money-losing proposition, and so I thought I would make some money by publishing erotica. This is a 2015. This series started in 2015. It's called New Lovers. They come in these iconic purple covers, and we published 9 of them so far. They exist in paperback and in ebook. They're all written by women. The gambit, the wager, is that the language and ideas about sexuality is changing, as it ought to. And we need a new way of describing what is pleasing and what is not pleasing to us. And so we invited young and old female writers to write in the genre of erotica, but more or less whatever they want to. And we published them in these covers. It was inspired by a wonderful publisher that I admire. He's a complete scoundrel. His name is Maurice Giadis. He was the founder of Olympia Press, who published erotica in the 1960s and 70s under the series called the Traveler Companion series. And they're the iconic green covers, and we made ours in purple. This is New Lovers number 2, We Love Lucy, by Lilith West. It's basically 3 people in a room for 7 chapters. I'm just going to plug one of my personal favorite New Lovers, Kundalini, by Tamara Faith Berger. Tamara is a wonderful novelist who hails from Toronto, and this is a story about yoga. This is a story about a yoga session gone terribly right or terribly wrong. I think I show this because of the blurb on the upper right by the great poet and writer Ariana Reines. I still don't know what it means, but I love it. It's a wonderful book. And her first novel, Maidenhead, was incredible too. I encourage anyone who's interested in great fiction to read it. I'm going to go on to some of the artist works that we have published. This is artist Dred Scott standing in front of our New Nose installation at the Whitney Museum. New Nose is a set of posters was one poster that we made in 2016, 2 weeks after the election, 2 weeks after the presidential election. And this is a picture of Dred standing in front of it because Dred was also in that show called An Incomplete History of Protest at the Whitney Museum that was up for a year. It just closed in August. And they invited Dred to talk about a piece of work in that show, and he decided to talk about New Nose. And I love Dred. Dred's actually a Badlands author. We published something of his a year and a half ago. And so I wanted to show a picture of him in front of it. New Nose began as a poem that Badlands wrote 2 weeks after the election because we felt like we wanted to say exactly how we felt. We wanted to be unequivocal about it. And so we wrote this poem, and we sent it out in our email newsletter. As just we published something called Publisher's Note. If you are subscribed to our website, we'll send out these Publisher's Notes every once in a while. And 2 weeks after the election, 2016 presidential election, we sent out this poem in 20 different languages. English to start, Russian, Chinese, Korean. And then a couple weeks after that, we decided to make a poster out of it. So we made a 24 by 36 poster, very simple. And we started selling them on our website. We started sending them to Printed Matter and other places. And we like them because it looks beautiful. Also, we raise money for people. We raise money for 4 specific groups. Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, Black and Pink, which is a LGBTQ advocacy group for LGBTQ prisoners around the country, and the Ida B. Wells Society, which is a not-for-profit group dedicated to getting more journalists of color in newsrooms and supporting their long-form investigative work. So, in many ways, it's, got it, 3 minutes, thank you, Mindy. Many ways, it's, we're just trying to funnel money. We made it work. We want to funnel money to the people that we think, Badlands thinks, will protect us in the future. New no's have gone everywhere, the Whitney, people's homes, and we have taken that approach one step further with this new series of works. This is in DC. These signs are called New Proverbs. This is, these activists used these signs at the March for Equality in Washington, D.C. in July 10th, 2017. New Proverbs was inspired by, sounds terrible. New Proverbs was inspired by the Westboro Baptist Church. For those of you who may not know, Westboro Baptist Church is a family that functions as a church from Kansas, and they're famous in the 80s and 90s up to now for protesting funerals, where they would hold up these colorful, gigantic signs that says, "God hates your gay son," or "God hates your dead daughter." They're hateful. Arguably, they are pioneers of hate speech in America, pioneers of religious hate speech in America. But their signs look great. They're very colorful. They're gigantic. There's just a look to them. And when our president became our president, one of my ideas was, let's use hate against hate. And so I stole the look and feel of the Westboro Baptist Church signs and made these signs instead. The ambition is to erase the Westboro Baptist Church signs completely in cultural memory, to appropriate it so much that no one will remember those signs and only remember these signs. I think that's the true, conceptually speaking, I think it's the true ambition of appropriation, to erase the original. That's our ambition. These are the 4 original signs. We've gone on to make signs. What I like about these signs also is that we premiere them at protests. So these are some of the first signs. This was at the Women's March. This is the first time the world saw them at the Women's March in D.C. in January 21st, last year. I'll show you some other places they've gone. This is the general strike in New York at Washington Square Park in February last year. This is at the Stonewall Inn protest, also in February, protesting against the immigration ban proposed by our president. It would be a shame if these signs were only in metropolitan areas. And so one of the things that we did was we sent them out to artists, independent spaces, and bookshops who wanted them. We would send them out for free. We would pay for the shipping, handling. We would eat the costs. We wanted to get them out there. They can use them however they like. Fundraisers, decoration, whatever. We didn't care. So this is in a field in Des Moines, Iowa. This was in Savannah, Tennessee, at the Piggly Wiggly. This was done for a party and fundraiser in Atlanta, Georgia. Our last set of signs that we premiered was this year, this March. After the Parkland shooting, the Parkland students made an incredible stand against gun violence and organized a national school walkout against school violence and also March for Our Lives. And Badlands wanted to support them. And so we got together with 4 high schools in New York, 2 in the Bronx, 1 in Manhattan, 2 in Brooklyn. And we produced these signs for the students, teenagers to take. Whoever wanted them, we would give it to them so they can use them for that national walkout day. So these are some signs in the Bronx. kids using them at Bronx Science on that day. A few more signs. This is in Brooklyn. You can see the signs in the back. Courageous kids. The kids are right. More Brooklyn. I like this one. It says it all to me. Manhattan. How much time do I have, Mindy? I think that's it anyway. All right, so I'm going to end it here. Thank you.
So great. Thanks so much. So now it's time for all of our speakers to come up to the table and turn their microphones on. We can help you if you need it. And we're going to have our Q&A. We're doing really great with time and plenty of time for you to ask questions. And so Tony, Jared, Allison, Jennifer, Russet, everybody come up. I'm going to... Oh, yes. So this, while they're coming to the table, I'll remind you that we do have two microphone passers. We have Holly and William from the Watson Library. And because this program is being filmed, we ask you to make sure that you raise your hand and you ask your question through the mic, and that you identify yourselves briefly. And we're going to allow the speakers to first ask questions a couple of questions of each other. Just start out that way if they have any questions for each other. And at the end of this period, I'll give you some details about lunch and so forth. So first, do we have questions from the speakers of each other?
One very specific one. Russet, was there you coined the term new materialists. Was there an old materialist?
No old materialists.
Okay.
Materials were always there. But there was a show, I should mention, that was in San Francisco at Casemore Kirkby Gallery. And it was the first time that I saw this focusing on the materials really coming into light. And that was about 2 years ago.
Well, we also want you to feel very comfortable asking any question that you have, so go for it. Don't be shy. Any other questions from the speakers of each other? Okay, well, we can open it up to the floor. Any questions? Don't tell me there's no questions. Oh, good.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, hi, Dorothy Goldman. I want to go back to Jared's first talk, and first of all, I found all of the talks illuminating because this is not a field that I am familiar with, and it is absolutely eye-opening. But when I looked at Jared's images, I thought about Matisse, I thought about Dada, and I thought about all Richard Prince, appropriation, and it appears to me that the artist's books are either an undercurrent or a forerunner for what we consider to be our major art of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. So what is your opinion about that?
Well, I'm extremely glad you asked, because that's the part that I realized I left off, and that was the big kind of bang in the conclusion, which is why we're collecting this and why it's so essential and why it's critical and why it absolutely belongs here, and it's something that we should have been doing more solidly throughout the history of the museum, but we've really kind of only been making up for it and kind of this kind of very aggressive collecting and catching up within the past 5 or 10 years, both within Watson and drawings and prints, photographs, because it is essentially, you're missing an entire part of art history and kind of developments. It's as if saying, well, we're going to look at everything from this period except sculpture, and kind of and profess to know the entire history of what happened during that period. You do have things like collage and things that happened in the book format that really don't appear elsewhere. And they've been neglected because the book was, for some reason, set aside as something that wasn't a fine art or a visual art, or they were more difficult to show in vitrines and nobody wants to go around looking with their head down, or it doesn't go up on a wall, or that's kind of a historic thing. But so now, as we realized, and especially with the museum's mission of having this more encyclopedic, comprehensive, worldwide focus and making this material available and telling a more complete, broader story and expanding the narrative, this is really the critical material. We have original works in there. A lot of times also the material wasn't collected because, as Ken had explained in the beginning, we collected books about these books, not the books themselves, but books about these books might have one spread or one image, and they're really not made available. The same attention and scholarship hasn't been devoted to them as works hanging in galleries that have been exhibited over and over again. But it really is, now what we're doing and going back, realizing this now, we're going back and collecting where we can, things like Japanese constructivism, Japanese Dada, Mavo periods, things as it's possible and as it's available and as our resources allow. But to be able to fill in these entire gaps is really very prohibitive and almost impossible. So that's why we're so, grateful for these collections coming to us like Liliana's, and we can never replicate or out of nothing create a collection of 1,200 primarily Italian artist books from the 60s or 70s, and yet that's an amazing resource to bring here. Things like Russian books, again, unfortunately, we have very few of them, and it's something that ideally we recognize as things that should be here, and if we're going to tell stories about Dada or constructivism or anything, we need the books, but it's just something that hadn't been recognized previously, and now we'll figure out, in order to tell those stories and to get that full picture, it's material that really needs to be here, and hopefully we can, very encouraged by the direction and its kind of general consensus that this is critical material, and it seems to be the support and definitely the enthusiasm and dedication on the museum's part and the library's part to make that happen. Yes.
For Paul Chan, could you elaborate more about the use of the ebook format for artist books? I don't think I got too much of that in your presentation. Where do you see that going?
You didn't get too much up.
It's on, yeah.
Hello, can you hear me? I think you didn't get much of it because I didn't say much of it. And I'm sorry. We started in 2010 making ebooks for a couple of reasons. Like I said, one is because it was cheap. I'm the only investor in Badlands, and it's not a not-for-profit. It's a small business, so I need to figure out a way to make it within the means of my studio. And ebooks are essentially dumb websites. I may not have money to print books at the time. I still may not. But at the time, I thought it would be much more economical to make publications that were ebooks. The other thing was people hate ebooks. I think they still do. The people who made fun of me for making ebooks is Legion. They still do. But I kind of love that. I love things that are hated. I think of that Brecht quote. He said, "You should never start with the good old things, but the bad new things." And there's nothing more bad and new than ebooks. There's also a great level of experimentation with ebooks, interactivity, multimedia. The Duchamp book, for instance, that you saw that we published, the ebook version has audio of Duchamp speaking. In the Yvonne Rainer paper book, it exists as a paper book and an ebook. In the ebook, you can see Yvonne dancing. We've also done a lot of experimental ebooks where it has more in the spirit of what Debord did or what Dieter Roth did, but they're in ebook form and in multimedia form by younger artists like Petra Kortright, whose book Hell Tree was the first ebook that was reviewed in Art Forum, and I'm very proud of that. And so it continues to be a platform for experimentation. The issue, though, is, I won't go on too long, is that unfortunately there hasn't been development in the ebook distribution. It's still basically two people, Amazon and Apple, and the lack of development and distribution actually stymies the market. It's an explicit example of how monopolies destroy diversity and destroy the potential of growth of something, of anything.
Hi, this is a question for Jennifer Farrell. I was really interested in your talk about Jorn and Debord. I was wondering, when you were talking about the memoir, you talked about the convergence of memory and map, and I didn't quite get the map part. And since Debord, of course, was the founder of psychogeography, it seemed to be an important point that just kind of got moved through very quickly. So I thought I would like to hear a little bit more about that. And the other question I have is, do you know if the two of them, clearly when they were authoring these two books, gave each other permission to be the single author of each book, or how did that whole thing work out?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I got the notice of about 1 minute left when we got to memoirs, so that's why we did not go into psychogeography, but I have whole pages in my paper written about it. So psychogeography was the idea that feelings inspire particular, or places inspire particular feelings, and to navigate the city, preferably the old city, the Les Halles area, the Marais. This is a time when Paris, as well as many other cities, were undergoing incredible, some would say modernization, some would say destruction. So the kind of raising of the old village and the old format for, I guess here we would have, in New York City with Moses, with the difference in New York City. So the Situationists were absolutely as opposed in opposition to that, and that's something important. Paris was also, during this post-war period, they lost something like a quarter of their percentage of workers, and they were replaced by more upper middle class. So it was very much in opposition to gentrification. And that's important because this was a group of very young people. I may not have mentioned it, but Memoir was started when Debord was 26. So it's unusual, especially back then, to write a memoir beginning at 26. What has one done? I guess now with teenagers writing them, it's a little different. So that was the idea. It was a very kind of almost romantic notion. So despite the situation and the active opposition to the cultural situation, it was a kind of romantic opposition, the idea of traveling aimlessly throughout the city. They were often drunk, or at least they professed to be, without direction, almost going back to Baudelaire, like the flaneur. So this is something that they did as a group in Paris, in London, and other places. And that idea of mapping and the reference to some of the buildings and the London Underground was absolutely found throughout Memoir, as was the idea of the dérive, or the drift. So that's the aimless moving through the place. So it's without looking at a clock, without looking at a map, without looking at a kind of structure. And this, I think, also relates to some of the surrealists, rather. You can think of Nadia, for example. And so that's the kind of history, but Debord would probably never admit that because he was also about the break with the past, including Isidore Zou, who was really a kind of a pivotal figure for him. And in Memoir, it's about breaking that up. You asked another question. I'm afraid I don't remember.
I'm wondering if the first book was given to Yorn as the author, Brendan the authorship.
Right.
The second one was Debord. I mean, do you know anything more about that? 'Cause it seems like there must be some sort of.
Well, the first book was really Yorn's was the force behind it. He paid for both books, and he actively distributed them. But the first book he was Danish, so it was going back to Copenhagen, and it's been translated as End of Copenhagen or Goodbye to Copenhagen. So he was living in Paris at the time. He was close to Debord. They saw each other regularly. This was a period when he brought Debord with him. He knew the printers, and so he was really the force behind it. It's not telling his own story. It's really much more of a critique of advertisements as taken from the paper, whereas Memoir is really based on Guy Debord's a kind of memoir. So you see his photo throughout. Yorn may be in one of the group shots, and they're pivotal events in 3 periods over about a 15-month period. And so you see Debord tracing his earlier involvement with Le Triste to the screening of the Howlings for de Sade, which really to him represented a break between those who professed to be in the avant-garde and those who were really in the avant-garde. And then a kind of finally perhaps a split with the Le Triste and the kind of creation of the Situationist. So it's a new beginning in a sense. So this was very much his own passage, and he also was much more involved with the arrangement of all the text. So he worked on it for over a year and a half of arranging the text, and that Jorn very much didn't do the dramatic drops. He more like drew on the plates and arranging the text according to Debord's direction. Debord, of course, also was the leader of the Situationists, and he was at one time, I think, one of 3 members because he expelled everyone. So I think that power dynamic is not unrelated to whose story gets told.
So whoever asks the next question, please identify yourself and make sure to speak into the microphone.
I'm Richard Castellanos. I wanted to ask Paul about ebooks. Is an ebook meant to be printed by the purchaser? Is that so? So you don't print the purchaser prints. The reader
No.
prints.
No, they don't. There's no print function, as far as I'm aware.
So it's your definition of an ebook is something that cannot be printed.
Yeah, well, that would be one of them.
Okay.
Just downloaded, yeah.
No, I mean, sorry. What does downloaded mean?
That an ebook is accessible for purchase by a closed ecosystem like Amazon, your Amazon Kindle or Apple iBook on an iPad. The EPUB format actually existed before these monetized systems, but Amazon and Apple found a way to monetize it. And so, but fundamentally, technically, ebooks are just dumb websites that you have to pay for.
An ebook can be print on screen to you.
I suppose you could do a screenshot of your iPad and then print it out. Yes, I suppose you can. Are you looking to get free books?
No, quite the opposite.
I can talk you through it. It's a couple steps. If
No,
you
no,
wanna
no.
do it.
Quite the
I'm
opposite.
happy to do it.
Quite the opposite. I published my first ebook within the past month.
Oh,
And-
yeah?
And the definition of it is it cannot be printed.
Well, it
cannot
sounds
be
like we
printed.
just worked out a way that it could.
No, you couldn't possibly print it. You couldn't possibly print it.
Well, I have a question about that to Paul. How do you feel about preserving these, preserving your e-books? Is that an issue for you?
No, my only issue is that people buy them. And write blurbs. Thank you. I think, libraries have approached us about collecting them in their collections, and we've worked with them on figuring out how to do it. And technology, one of the great undercurrents of technology is restoration software. You know what I mean? Software that creates a virtual environment where older software can run. Essentially, Wall Street runs on virtual machines. They've been running programs using Fortran. So there's a long, robust industry. I'm sure you know at the Met of tech people figure out ways to make virtual systems that let older systems run. And I have no doubt that is possible. I'm too busy trying not to go bankrupt.
Bob Rubin, New York. 2 things. One, to Ms. Rudnick, would you care to comment on the relationship of Diderot to Voss and Bookie Wookie and who influenced whom and how? And secondly, to Paul again, the whole problem of preservation. I'm well aware of the systems, but in many instances they're not used, and you have 2 real problems. Number one, the software, unless you use this, won't be around 5 years from now. Secondly, the digital storage is really a victim of cosmic radiation and degenerates, whereas you can scribble something on a piece of paper and it'll be here 500 years from now. So what you've done with the ebooks is extremely valuable. How will our great-great-grandchildren be able to access them?
Sorry, can you just repeat your question about
Relationship of Diderot to Voss and Bookie Wookie.
Oh,
Who
sure.
influenced who?
So I have to admit, Bookie Wookie is actually new to me. I'll do my best. I've done research on Diderot's books from the 50s, and I just encountered Bookie Wookie actually through Tony White. and through the collection at Watson. So thank you, Tony. And so the extent of my knowledge is that Bookie Wookie essentially published, and in cases also printed, Rotes books. I don't know, I haven't researched examples of new books that they created with Dieter in the 90s, but a fascinating component of their relationship is that clearly Dieter was doing his best to create books in the 50s and 60s in large editions over and over, and he very rarely completed those editions. And so to return to these works 30, 40 years later and complete the edition does something very different to the books. And there's also interesting parallels between the publications he did with Bookie Wookie versus with Hans-Georg Meyer, the collected works, which are, they're you can call them reissues of book, more historic books, but they, as you saw on the screen, they look completely different from the originals. And so I think there's a really interesting, there's more to explore. I would like to further explore this relationship between the works that he was making in the 50s and 60s, often on his own or with friends and collaborators, that he returned to create entirely new books with a completely different meaning a few decades later.
Hi, my name is Amanda, and I have a question about the use of these materials that you've recently acquired, and whether or not that has been something you feel is, I'm just questioning the frequency and kind of how readers are accessing the materials in various departments, given that they do cross over many lines as we traditionally know them.
Can I answer a little bit of that? So if you notice, your packet has a handout about assessing the collections in the museum. And we've done our best, Jared and Allison, Jennifer, Jenny Davis, we've done our best to tease out for you, because the books are in different departments, and different departments have different access policies and times, and how the collections are used. But and how to find them online is also different, because some of our books are in the library collections, and those are available through our online catalog. And some of the books are cataloged as art objects, and they may be even two copies of the same book cataloged in different ways occasionally. So you need to look in both places, and all that's been laid out for you in that handout. So from a practical point of view, you just have to know where to go and who to ask and what the hours are, and what the procedure. Mostly, you're going to find books in the Department of Drawings and Prints study room. You would make an appointment to go there. And in Watson, a lot of our artist books are requestable, and many of them they'll be fetched for you when you arrive, because they're in the special collections and we don't pull those books early. But all those books you can request. You can find them and you can request ahead of time once you've registered to use the library, and they'll be waiting for you. And only occasionally we have books that are extremely fragile that we would have to make we have a by appointment status for only very few things that we think could so easily be damaged. And we also buy 2 copies of some books if we think that they're going to be compromised. So we sort of have an exhibition copy and a used copy, because we know these books are not going to handle that well. So I don't know if I've answered the question you've asked, but I'm sure Jared and Tony also, and Allie and Jennifer might have something to add about that.
I just wanted to add that we display our artist books also in the Johnson Gallery, as well as exhibitions. And in fact, upstairs on the 2nd floor right now is Richard Tuttle's Hiddenness, which was from Dieudonné. So you can see that on view right now.
And other ways that we make the collections available are we do host classes, whether specifically book arts classes, which is something we couldn't do even 3 years ago, because we couldn't even fill 3 tables worth of, kind of classic or enough examples to tell the story and show students enough of variation in structures and things. But largely through Rob and Bob and Yvonne's gift, we've now been able to host Robin Silverberg's class, or the book class from Pratt, and numerous others from Mason Gross. Bart Madsen students are coming now here because it is, education and is such a key, part of our mission, and to be able to accommodate these groups. And it was pretty much the one thing that we couldn't really accommodate and help teachers out with. And then also individual artists have come. who have been, and as they make their interests known to us, they're looking for interesting structures, bindings, photographers looking to do kind of limited editions or look at interesting kind of enclosures and ways of presenting things. Those are all things as, we provide as reference services, as kind of almost as concierge, direct personal reference service as people come to us and request that information. And everything, as Mindy said, most books, everything in Watson Library is available and requestable. And whether, I think there are 80 things total out of 1 million books that actually have this by appointment status. And it's generally books because they do require some special instruction in the opening or handling, or they're things that are extremely fragile, and we want to make sure that we preserve them for future generations.
And just to add to that, we also have a program, an instruction program that the visiting researcher instruction program. And so faculty bring their classes in, just like Robin Silverberg and others, and we do special collection displays for them. We've also done gallery talks in the museum about specific artist books and other rare materials in the collection. There's Met Fridays, where we also do displays of books as well. And also we have, as Jared said, we have some artists, like Cheryl Oppenheim came in and she's doing books on marbling and suminagashi, and she found reference materials in our books and found the formula for these and used those and incorporated them into her works. Tauba Auerbach also came in as well, and we gave her Stax access, and she walked around and did research in relation to ornament and new publications that she was making as well. So we really try to, open up our collection to researchers and artists as well.
And since we're name dropping artists using the collection, Jen Mazza also very early on did a artist book on Malevich, on reproductions of Malevich's paintings, an artist books looking through material in the collection.
I need to also now plug the Drawings and Prints study room. The Drawings and Prints department, as we've seen today, also has an extensive collection of artist books. I think that all of the information you need is in your packets, but we also have a collection of over 1 million drawings, prints, books, illustrated books, artist books, ephemera in our collection. It can be a little difficult to navigate. So I just want to encourage all of you, and you can also please encourage anyone you know who's interested to just give us a call. Our phone number is in the packet. Our study room's open 5 days a week. It is open only by appointment, but we have a very accommodating staff, I believe. And our collection is meant to be accessible to anyone who wants to view it. So, and we also host classes as well. So
That's, I mean, anybody who doesn't make an appointment to see things in all these collections is losing a big opportunity. So we have more questions? Can I just follow up? Yeah, oh yeah, sure, Amanda.
I think the heart of my question was really about frequency and whether or not that has been surprising at all for you. So kind of tracking, like, is this are you seeing more readers finding these types of publications who might have never heard of an artist book before? And is that surprising to you, or is that kind of, I mean, now they're available, which is great. And thank you for explaining all that. But has that been a kind of uptick, or have you been, or is it difficult to get the word out, I guess, is maybe.
That's one of the reasons why we are having the symposium.
And I think even Holly Phillips, there, as you'll see afterwards, or for the reception later, we have basically within the library, we have about 4 vitrines that we, to the extent of our abilities to show new acquisitions or interesting things, materials. We've just put artist books out, largely selected from the gifts. And they've been in there for about 2 or 3 days, and the response has been, I mean, it's people who have never seen artist books, have never heard of it, have never thought anything about them. And I mean, Holly, you have anything to add to that?
This is true. I've heard stories where people are walking through the Velez Blanco patio and just kind of peeking in, as you'll see when you come into the library. The vitrines, as Jared said, just a couple of days old, and people are interested and they're asking questions, which is great.
Hi, my name is Karina Reynolds. So actually, this is really great to follow up on what we've all been talking about right now. But Paul, you've been talking a lot about outward looking, and we just talked a lot about how people can access your collections. But I'm wondering if you all could talk a little bit about some of the issues with exhibiting artist books or getting them out into the public, and what you guys are doing to kind of innovate or change the way that we look at artist books through exhibitions.
I think what we've tried to do with Badlands is to work with people who have done it well, Printed Matter, Ooga Booga, other independent art bookshops that not only show books, but you can buy them and they exhibit them. We've also tried to do that we have an office in the Lower East Side, and we're on the storefront, and on the basement floor is one of those 99-cent stores. It's like, and so. We made a business deal with the 99-cent store. The 99-cent store is called YP 99 cents and up, huge red sign, 24 Rutgers Street. And we just rebranded it without changing a thing. We just told people it's called Young Publisher 99 cents and up. And we made a deal with them. I said, we're not going to do anything, just give us a shelf. We'll show our books. People can buy them. It's cash only. You'll get a cut. Everyone is happy. And it took some weeks, but we made a deal. And so they started selling our books and showing our books last year. And it was a great collaboration. And I think maybe beyond the particular of that instance of making a deal and making the only art bookshop in New York that's open 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, cash only, is the idea that artist books afford artists a different production cycle. That my guess is the spirit of what DeBoer and wrote was going through was the idea that we don't have to wait for a show to make something, because museums and galleries have their own cycle, and artists don't have to follow that cycle. And the artists who follow that cycle are probably not very good artists.
So do commercial publishers.
What's that?
So do commercial publishers.
Precisely. And so the idea is, can you find a way to make your own production cycle and to not follow someone else's? The press was my way of doing it. My guess is it was their way of doing it. Whether or not it shows up in museums and galleries is not up to us, but we don't care. We're just going to make them, and we'll try to survive through the making. So, does that make sense?
Can I just actually put on my other hat, which is 10 by 10 Photobooks, which is a nonprofit 501c3. And what we do is actually set up reading rooms that travel globally. And since they're not within museum libraries or more classical situations, the books are out on tables for people to go through them, to touch them, to turn the pages, to hold them. And the idea is to be able to have this direct contact that Paul is talking about with books that are normally not accessible. And I think it's a very good point that you bring up, Karina, because oftentimes you have audiences that don't necessarily have the information that a book might remain in a museum library. And the big question is, how do we enlarge the audience? How do we get these books out to more people to become familiar with them?
And once a book enters the institution, the museum's role is twofold: to preserve art, of course, keep it safe, and also to make it accessible to the public. So that's tough with artists' books, but one way to go about that, if there's a book in one's collection that can't be handled, it's endangered of falling apart. Facsimiles are one way that I think a lot of institutions get around that. Making GIFs or videos, like Tony did in his presentation of the pages being turned. It's not the same thing as, you don't have that tactile, intimate quality, but obviously one of our more important jobs is to keep these things safe and accessible, not just for this generation, but for generations to come. So I think that I've seen institutions experimenting with different ways to make these objects both available and to preserve them. But it's a tough question.
It's a challenge. So we have about 5 more minutes. So we still have time for a few questions.
My name is Megan Forbes. My question is a general question for those of you who are at the Met. With this more recent investment in artist books, not just in the form of collection, but in terms of education, things like this, does that have any impact then on your investment in artists or artist groups making periodicals, journals, magazines, and such? And then also kind of piggybacking on this question around exhibition, do these artist books and related periodicals find their way more often into the exhibition spaces?
At the Met, you mean?
Yes.
Specifically? You wanna?
I think initially the conspiracy show that's up at the Breuer, when the curators were working on that, they came to the library and asked us if we had any zines on conspiracy, or if we could recommend other periodicals. So we do act as a resource and a reference for curators that are working on projects, and provide reference materials when we can.
I would say for our area, it's probably not a secret. We have some gaps in the collection, like every museum does. And post-war Europe and some artist books like The Situationist, we were very happy to fill with De Boer. Now, we only have memoir. We don't have Fin de Copenhagen's. We would love one if anyone here feels so inclined. But it's a plug for the department, because it would be lovely to show them together. But so we've been working also. We just added recently, you may have seen Unku Today, that was about on display about a year ago. So this is an area that I think across the board isn't as well represented in the museum as it should be. And a lot of some of the very interesting artists were part of artist groups in Europe during that time. We're also working, Fluxus and other groups.
Megan, I don't know, were you asking also if we kind of actively like commission or kind of encourage creation of material? Yeah, we do it, and anytime. I mean, that's one thing that anytime they're offered, and within our means, we'll get full runs of pretty much any art-related journal in the 20th century that's kind of significant, or especially artist publications or self-published runs, whether it's 1910 Danish or Finnish, to 1960s and 70s. As Jennifer said, there's a lot of gaps. So certainly.
Hi, my name's Daphne Taranto of Fully Booked. I had a question for Russet. Looking at Japan, it sounds like you travel there pretty regularly for collecting purposes. And I was just wondering, considering that I know we're going to maybe talk about fairs more in the afternoon, but the Tokyo Art Book Fair is one of the biggest fairs like this in the world. Does that, and you didn't mention it, so I was just wondering if that you think influences the way that the new materialists are working in the expectation of having this sales platform and audience, and if how that influences you as a collector. Do you plan to go for the fair every year? I think it's been 5 years or so.
Yeah.
So
There's also a fair in Kyoto called Kyotographie. One of the big problems, I think, in the kind of artist book, photo book world is that these activities happen in localized areas. And so what often happens is that we don't find out in the US that much about what's happening in books in Japan or in South America or in South Asia. And so it takes a collector or independent book publishers to be traveling back and forth to have these dialogues. And I'm going to go back to my role as 10 by 10 photo books. I mean, one of the things that we do is create reading rooms that travel globally, specifically to take books from Japan, which was our first reading room that we did at the ICP Bard Space during the New York Art Book Fair, and have it travel to different cities in venues that are accessible. And so I do have the opportunity to travel to Japan, but many others don't. And so the goal is always to bring the books from Japan, whether it's in a reading room, but in some accessible way. Does it influence the way that they work? I think what influences the way they work more is this really strong history of bookmaking in Japan. And that comes way before any book fairs. Japan didn't have a gallery system for photography, or for art for that matter. So the only way to get your work out there was in book format. And that then connects with the history of woodblock prints and the books that came from that. So in my opinion, the books are better than the photographic prints. They're much more interesting.
Thank you so much. Well, we are sadly out of time for our Q&A period. And yeah, I'd like to thank this morning's speakers for your generous contributions to this day, and they were all wonderful, wonderful talks. And I hope you all had a good time. And so before we split up for lunch, I want to tell you there's food out for you in the hallway, and there's a couple locations you can split up. And we have a lot of Watson staff around who can help you. Are there Watson staff in this room that want to raise your hand or stand up? We're going to be looking for you and try to guide you. But the first lunch, after you get your lunch, because of the size of the group, we had to split up. So the art study room is right to the right of this room, and that is the largest room we have. The north classroom, which is also set up for you, you have to walk back down the corridor and then go to the make a sharp right, and it's called the north classroom. There's a sign there, and you can sit there. You can also just hang out in the hall, or you can come back and sit in here. You might want to go outside. So. And the Nolan Library. So the Nolan Library in the Teachers Resource Center was our overflow place, and you can go in there as well. Please be back. Please be back in your seats at 1:30 promptly, and for our next session. Thank you.